Hello, night explorers of the Boring Testament. A very warm welcome to another foray into the narratives that shaped Western thought, but which, seen up close and in the right light, or lack thereof, in our cozy darkness, reveal details, let's say, quite peculiar. Today, my dears, we're leaving the pyramids of Egypt behind, but not the scorching sun. Prepare your imaginary canteens, because our journey will take us to one of the longest and, frankly, most poorly managed spiritual retreats in history. The 40 years of the Israelites in the desert. You think running out of phone battery is a jam? Oh, my friends, you haven't seen anything yet. Before we cross the Red Sea of your deepest thoughts, an invitation. Leave a like and subscribe. If you enjoy the stories of the Boring Testament for falling asleep or for pondering until sleep arrives, and tell me in the comments where you are joining us from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to know who's with us on this nocturnal journey through time and scriptures. All right then, pull your favorite blanket up to your neck. Adjust those headphones well. Maybe cover your eyes with that sleep mask. And let's set sail together towards a land that, though promised, took a little while to be delivered. The Bible tells us that after centuries of a forced cultural exchange in Egypt, also known as slavery, the people of Israel were freed by a series of rather spectacular divine interventions. Plagues, staffs turning into snakes, a sea parting like a theater curtain, a Hollywood-worthy blockbuster, with God as the director and Moses as the reluctant protagonist, finally free. Can you imagine the euphoria? Leaving behind the bricks without straw, the cruel taskmasters, the servitude, ahead, the promise of a land flowing with milk and honey, a walk of a few days, maybe weeks, and voila, paradise on earth, right? Well, not exactly. It seems the divine GPS had other plans, or perhaps an alternative tourist route through Sinai, focused on character development through extreme trials, because right after the cinematic crossing of the Red Sea, complete with the mass drowning of the Egyptian army, a scene that certainly didn't help future diplomatic relations, our newly freed people find themselves with a small logistical problem. They're in the middle of nowhere. The desert, a vast, arid, unforgiving place, and there were many of them. The Bible mentions 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children, a multitude, an entire nation camped under the harsh sun, with limited supplies, and a faith that would be tested to the last drop of water, or the last complaint. And the complaints weren't long in coming. 3 days of walking, and no drinkable water. They arrive at Marah, and the water is bitter. The people grumble against Moses. What shall we drink? A valid question. Let's agree. Freedom is great, but thirst is a terrible companion. Moses cries out to the Lord, and God, in a quick and somewhat homeopathic solution, shows him a piece of wood. Moses throws the wood into the waters, and they become sweet. First jam, first miraculous solution. But there's already a feeling in the air that this journey wouldn't be a walk in the park. We move on a bit. They reach Elim, with its 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, an oasis, a brief respite. Can you picture the scene? The crowd feasting, thinking, Okay, this is it. From now on, it's all shade and cool water. Little did they know that the desert has a very special way of crushing expectations, because soon after, in the desert of Sin, between Elim and Sinai, a new problem arises: hunger. The bread from Egypt ran out. Nostalgia for the abundance of slavery starts to hit hard. Yes, you heard that right. The people begin to say to Moses and Aaron, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." It's impressive how selective human memory is, don't you think? The whippings, the oppression, the bricks, all that seems to have been conveniently forgotten in the face of an empty stomach. And we, here in the comfort of our beds, allow ourselves a little irony. Were the flesh pots of Egypt really so bountiful for the slaves? Or was it just an idealization of a past less arid than the desert present? But God, in his infinite patience, which would be tested many, many times, hears the grumbling and announces a new gastronomic solution: manna, the bread from heaven, a mysterious substance like white coriander seed, tasting like wafers, made with honey, which would appear with the morning dew. Everyone was to gather only enough for the day, no hoarding, no greed, and on the sixth day, a double portion to ensure rest on the Sabbath. A miraculous diet, no doubt, but also somewhat monotonous, and one that demanded daily faith in provision. No long-term planning, no full pantry, just the trust that the next morning the heavenly breakfast would be there, waiting on the desert floor. A lesson in total dependence that, for a people fresh from a produce or perish mentality, must have been quite an adjustment. And the questions that remain for our nightly reflection: was this constant dependence meant to strengthen faith or to maintain control? And what do you suppose they did with the leftover manna at the end of the day, before it bred worms and stank? Details that the boring testament loves to imagine. Our nocturnal caravan through the boring testament resumes its march. We left the Israelites in the desert of Sin, with manna falling from the heavens, a divine solution for hunger, but one that, as we'll see, wouldn't satisfy all the people's cravings. Gratitude for the heavenly bread, it seems, had a short shelf life in the desert heat. Let's remember that their newfound freedom came with a new way of life, radically different from the one, however oppressive, they knew in Egypt. And adaptation, as always, is a noisy process. The biblical text doesn't skimp on accounts of grumbling, and, let's be frank, who could entirely blame them? Imagine the scene: a vast multitude, including the elderly and children, facing the same arid landscape every day, the same food. That honey cake flavor can get old after a few weeks or years, and the promise of a land flowing with milk and honey looking more and more like a distant mirage. The subtle irony here is that for a people chosen and freed by spectacular miracles, the immediate reality was one of disconcerting monotony and absolute dependence. Leaving the desert of Sin, the whole congregation of the children of Israel journeyed according to the Lord's commands and camped at Rephidim. And at Rephidim, an old acquaintance of desert travelers appears. lack of water, and there was no water for the people to drink. Again, manna fed them, but thirst was tightening its grip, and the people's reaction? Predictable and profoundly human. So the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Not a polite request, but a quarrel, a demand. Collective patience, already frayed, seemed to evaporate quickly under the harsh sun. Moses, our increasingly pressured leader, replies, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people were thirsty, and thirst isn't usually very receptive to theological arguments. They grumble against Moses. "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" Nostalgia for Egypt returns in full force. There, even as slaves, they had the Nile. Here, free, they had sand and the promise of a miracle that sometimes seemed slow to arrive. Moses, in a situation no leader would want to face, a thirsty crowd on the verge of a riot. The text says, "They are almost ready to stone me," cries out to the Lord again, "What shall I do with this people?" And God, with his particular divine pedagogy, offers another supernatural solution. He instructs Moses to take some elders of Israel, take his staff, the same one that performed wonders in Egypt and parted the Red Sea, and go on ahead of the people to the rock at Horeb. "Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb," says the Lord, "and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, and the people will drink." And Moses, obedient, does so. He strikes the rock, and water gushes out. The people drink. The crisis is temporarily resolved. The place was called Massa and Meribah, because of the quarreling of the children of Israel, and because they tested the Lord by saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" A question that, even after so many wonders, still hung in the dry desert air. And we allow ourselves to reflect, in the calm of this night, this constant need to prove divine presence through miracles to satisfy basic needs. Wouldn't it be a somewhat exhausting cycle for both the people and the divinity? But the challenges in the desert weren't just about nature or food. Lo and behold, a human enemy appears, Amalek. Then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. The Amalekites, a nomadic desert people, see the Israelites, perhaps weakened by their journey, as a target. And here we have Israel's first battle as a newly freed people, an abrupt transition from dependence on miracles to the need for military self-defense. Moses instructs Joshua, his faithful commander, "Choose men for us and go out, fight against Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand." While Joshua commands the battle in the valley, Moses, Aaron, and Hur go up to the top of the hill. And here occurs one of the most iconic scenes, and, for our nocturnal analysis, curiously symbolic of Moses' leadership. And so it was, when Moses held up his hand, that Israel prevailed, and when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. A victory conditioned by a leader's physical posture. Moses' arms, however, grow tired. He's human, and when his arms grow heavy, Israel begins to lose ground. Aaron and Hur, noticing the situation, take a stone, put it under him for him to sit on, and each supports one of his hands, one on one side, and the other on the other side. So his hands were steady until the going down of the sun, and Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword, a victory won through human effort on the battlefield, yet intrinsically linked to a symbolic gesture and the leader's intercession, who in turn needed his companion's support to keep the sign raised. What a powerful image for reflecting on the nature of leadership, interdependence, and faith in times of conflict. The staff of God in Moses' hand, his arms raised as a conduit for divine favor, and the need for human support to keep that channel open. And we ask ourselves, with the serenity the night allows, did divine strength need this postural aid, or was it more a lesson about unity and the shared burden of responsibility? The Lord then commands Moses to write this as a memorial in a book and to recount it to Joshua, that he would utterly blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven, a promise of future eradication for an enemy who dared to attack the chosen people in their vulnerability. And Moses built an altar and called its name Jehovah Nissi, which means the Lord is my banner. The journey in the desert, as we see in the Boring Testament, isn't just a geographical trek. It's a bumpy ride through human nature, divine patience, or the lack thereof at times, and the strange and wonderful ways the sacred and the mundane intertwine, leaving a trail of questions that accompany us to this day. Our nightly trek through the Boring Testament takes us further into the Israelites' arid journey. After the victorious battle against the Amalekites, a reminder that newfound freedom would need to be defended not just with faith, but also with the sword, and with Moses establishing the altar of the Lord is my banner, a new chapter begins, bringing a touch of human resource management and family reunions right in the desert. Yes, because even in the middle of nowhere, with an entire people to guide, personal and administrative life doesn't take a vacation. Exodus chapter 18 tells us that Jethro, the priest of Midian and Moses' father-in-law, heard about everything God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, and how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. News that, apparently, traveled fast even without broadband in the desert, and Jethro decides to pay a visit, bringing with him some precious cargo. Zipporah, Moses' wife, whom he had sent away at some earlier point, a marital detail the text doesn't elaborate on, leaving room for our nocturnal curiosity, and Moses' two sons, Gershom and Eliezer. Imagine the scene. Moses, overwhelmed by the demands of a grumbling people, battles, the search for water and food, suddenly sees his father-in-law arriving with his wife and children. A family reunion amidst the chaos of the camp. Moses goes out to meet Jethro, bows, and kisses him. They greet each other and enter Moses' tent. There, Moses recounts to his father-in-law all the Lord's wonders, the hardships of the journey, and how God had delivered them. Jethro rejoices, offers blessings, and acknowledges the greatness of the God of Israel, superior to all other gods. A conversion, or, at the very least, profound respect from a priest of another tradition, and, as a good priest, Jethro offers a burnt offering and sacrifices to God, and then Aaron and all the elders of Israel come to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God, a meal of fellowship, a moment of peace and mutual recognition. It seems that, for a brief moment, the complaints and hardships of the desert gave way to celebration and family and spiritual diplomacy. The next day, however, the harsh reality of leading a nation falls back on Moses. He sits to judge the people, and the people stand before him from morning till evening, an endless line of complaints, disputes, legal issues, and probably a few more grumblings. Jethro observes this exhausting routine and, with the wisdom of an outsider and perhaps a little concern for his son-in-law's well-being, offers one of the most pragmatic and important pieces of advice of the entire journey. What you are doing is not good, Jethro tells Moses. You will surely wear yourself out, both you and these people who are with you, for this thing is too heavy for you. You are not able to perform it by yourself. An obvious observation for us, with our management manuals and delegation theories, but for Moses, perhaps immersed in the responsibility of being the sole direct channel to God, it wasn't so clear. The irony here is that the leader chosen to bring the people out of slavery was himself becoming a slave to his own work. Jethro's advice is simple and brilliant. Decentralize. Moses should continue to be the people's representative before God, bringing the major cases and teaching the statutes and laws. But for minor issues, he should choose capable men, God-fearing men of truth, who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them over the people as leaders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They would judge the minor cases, and only the major cases would be brought to Moses. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. A true masterclass in public administration, right in the desert. And Moses, to his credit, heeded the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he had said. He chooses capable men and establishes them as leaders and judges, an organizational structure that undoubtedly lightened the load on his shoulders and, who knows, maybe even shortened the complaint line queue a bit. And we ask ourselves, in the calm of this night, why didn't this very logical solution come directly from a divine instruction, but rather from the experienced eye of a Midianite father-in-law? Perhaps a heavenly wink reminding us that wisdom can come from unexpected sources, and that not every solution needs to come down from Mount Sinai on stone tablets. After this administrative restructuring, Jethro says goodbye and returns to his own land, a father-in-law who came, saw, advised, and departed, leaving a legacy of efficiency and common sense. And the Israelites, now with a more agile judicial system, hopefully, continue their journey in the 3rd month after leaving Egypt. On the very same day, they arrive at the desert of Sinai and camp before the mountain, the famous Mount Sinai. The stage is set for one of the most spectacular and theologically dense events in the entire Bible, the giving of the law. But that's a story that will require its own atmosphere of thunder, lightning, and divine awe, which we'll explore in our next foray here on the Boring Testament. For now, let's stick with the image of a slightly more organized camp. Thanks to the wisdom of an observant father-in-law, we left our Israelites camped at the foot of the imposing Mount Sinai, a setting that would soon become the stage for one of the most impactful and legislative divine revelations in history. After Jethro's pragmatic visit and organizational advice, the focus returns entirely to the relationship between God and his chosen people. And this relationship, as we're learning here on the Boring Testament, is anything but simple or predictable. Exodus chapter 19 throws us directly into the preparation for this transcendental encounter. Moses ascends the mountain to speak with God, and the instructions are clear. The people needed to prepare. This wasn't a simple divine chat. It was a cosmic state event. God announces he will come to Moses in a thick cloud so that the people may hear when he speaks and believe. Moses forever, a way to consolidate his prophet's authority, perhaps. The guidelines for the people are strict. Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their garments and be ready for the third day. For on the third day, the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. Sanctification, ritual purification, clean garments, external preparation for an internal encounter, or perhaps just not to offend divine sensibilities with desert dust. And most importantly, boundaries. And you shall set limits for the people all around, saying, take care not to go up into the mountain or touch the edge of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. No hand shall touch him, but he shall surely be stoned or shot with an arrow. Whether beast or man, he shall not live. Yes, night explorers. Such was the mountain's holiness that any unauthorized approach, human or animal, would result in the death penalty, a divine exclusion zone, reinforced with the threat of stoning or arrows. We wonder, in the calm of our reflection, if this imposed distance was to protect the people from God's overwhelming holiness, or to protect God from the people's curiosity or impurity, a theological boundary with lethal consequences. On the third day, in the morning, the spectacle begins. And what a spectacle! There were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast, so that all the people in the camp trembled. Imagine the scene: the sky splitting with sounds and lights, the earth trembling, a supernatural trumpet echoing through the mountains. No wonder the people trembled. And Moses brings the people out of the camp to meet God, and they stand at the foot of the mountain. Now, Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke. The text continues, because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. And as the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, fire, smoke, earthquake, a deafening trumpet sound, a theophany, a divine manifestation in its most overwhelming and sensorially oppressive form. If the goal was to inspire fear and reverence, it seems it was an absolute success. Moses speaks, and God answers him in a loud voice. The Lord calls Moses to the top of the mountain, and up there, more instructions about the boundaries, reinforcing that not even the priests could cross them without permission, lest the Lord break out against them. The concern with transgressing boundaries is a constant. It's in this setting of sacred dread that God begins to utter the words that would become the foundation of Judeo-Christian morality. the 10 Commandments. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. And then follow the prohibitions and commands. Have no other gods. Make no carved images. Do not take God's name in vain. Remember the Sabbath. Honor your father and mother. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not bear false witness. Do not covet. 10 fundamental rules. Concise, direct. And while God spoke, the people saw the thunder, the lightning, the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. And, understandably, when all the people saw these things, they drew back and stood far off. And they said to Moses, You speak to us, and we will listen. But do not let God speak to us, lest we die. The spectacle of the divine presence was a bit too intense for the audience. They preferred an intermediary, a spokesperson. The direct experience with the sacred in its overwhelming fullness was unbearable. And Moses reassures them, saying that God had come to test them, and that the fear of him might be before them, so that they might not sin. A pedagogy of dread, one might say. The people stand far off, but Moses approaches the thick cloud where God was, and we, here at the Boring Testament, reflect on this distance, on the human need for intermediaries to deal with the transcendent, on the fear that paralyzes and the fear that guides, on the irony of a God who wants a relationship with his people, but whose display of power is so overwhelming that the people beg him to keep a certain distance. And about these commandments, so central, yet which would be broken, reinterpreted, and debated for millennia, proving that legislating the human heart is a divinely complex task. The giving of the law was just beginning, and its implications and challenges would accompany Israel throughout its entire journey, and us in our nightly reflections, while Moses was up on Mount Sinai in a 40-day and 40-night theological immersion, receiving divine instructions and the famous tablets of the law written by the finger of God, a detail that alone would merit a good nightly reflection on divine calligraphy. Down below, in the camp, the chosen people's patience was starting to crumble like stale bread in the desert. The same people who trembled before the divine manifestation and begged not to hear God's voice directly now found themselves orphaned of their visible leader. And absence, as we know, is fertile ground for anxiety and not so brilliant ideas. Exodus chapter 32 throws us right into the midst of this crisis of leadership and faith. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. 40 days without news from the chief, in the middle of nowhere, with an invisible God whose last appearance was a show of pyrotechnics and terror. You can understand a bit of their insecurity, can't you? But the solution they find is, let's say, a spectacular regression. Make us gods, plural, who shall go before us. A desperate need for something tangible, visible, something they could follow and perhaps control a bit more than the thundering God of Sinai. And Aaron, Aaron, Moses' brother, the spokesman, the future high priest. His reaction to this popular demand is a case study in flexible leadership, or would it be convenient weakness? He doesn't rebuke the people, doesn't remind them of the recent theophany or the first commandment forbidding other gods and images. No, Aaron says, take off the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. A jewelry collection campaign for an idolatry project, and the people promptly hand over their gold. With the material in hand, Aaron took it from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made it a golden calf. A calf, golden, reminiscent perhaps of Egyptian cults like that of Apis. And then, before the gleaming image, they declare, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. A collective amnesia and an instant theological replacement. The invisible, thundering God of Sinai, who parted the sea and sent manna, is quickly exchanged for a metallic bovine. The irony here is so palpable, you can almost smell something burning. And it's not just the molten metal. And Aaron, not content with just making the idol, builds an altar before it and proclaims, tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord, a feast to the Lord with a golden calf as the centerpiece, an attempt at religious syncretism, trying to please Greeks and Trojans, or rather, internalized Hebrews and Egyptians. The next day, the people rise early, offer burnt offerings and peace offerings to the calf, and the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to revel. The word revel here, according to many scholars, can have connotations of pagan festivities that included dances and possibly other kinds of excesses. A real party in the desert, at the feet of a newly made god, while the original god was busy dictating laws about morality and exclusive worship up on the mountain. The timing, as always, is divinely ironic. Meanwhile, at the summit of Sinai, God, who apparently has a great panoramic view and doesn't miss a single detail of the party down below, updates Moses on the situation, and the tone is anything but friendly. Go, get down, says the Lord, for your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way that I commanded them. They have made for themselves a golden calf, and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it, and said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Divine disappointment is palpable, and the threat is drastic. I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them. And of you I will make a great nation. Yes, night explorers. The divine plan B was apparently to wipe the people of Israel off the map and start all over again just with Moses. A Ketrel Psalt Del version 2.0, focused on the prophet's descendants. But Moses, in one of his greatest moments of intercession, appeals to God's reputation, to his promise to the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why should the Egyptians say, with evil intent did he bring them out, to kill them in the mountains, and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your burning anger, and relent from this disaster against your people. A bold negotiation reminding God of his own promises and his image before the nations. And surprisingly, and the Lord relented from the disaster that he had said he would do to his people. Phew! Moses' diplomacy, once again, seems to have averted disaster. Moses then descends from the mountain, carrying the 2 tablets of the testimony, tablets written on both sides, the work of God, the writing of God, engraved on the tablets, a document of inestimable value. As he approached the camp and heard the uproar, Joshua, his assistant, remarks that there is a sound of war in the camp. But Moses, more experienced in the peculiar festivities of his people, corrects him. It is not the sound of shouting for victory or the sound of the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing that I hear. And upon drawing near and seeing the calf and the dancing, the scene that unfolds is too much for him. And Moses' anger burned hot, and he threw the tablets out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. The tablets of the law, written by the finger of God, smashed on the ground, an understandable act of fury, a powerful symbol of the covenant broken by the people, the divine contract, freshly signed, metaphorically torn up in the face of the first great betrayal. What a contrast from the reverent awe before the theophany on Sinai to the idolatrous orgy around a golden calf, and Moses, the intermediary between the divine and the human, now crushed between the sanctity of the law and the stupidity of his people, a situation that leaves us here at the Boring Testament, thinking about the fragility of promises, the speed with which the sacred can be forgotten, and the patience, or lack thereof, of both God and his prophets. The journey in the desert is far from being a bed of roses, or rather, a patch of manna. We left our Israelites on the Boring Testament in a state of mourning and apprehension, with God's direct presence withdrawn from the midst of the camp and divine communication relegated to the tent of meeting, visited by a pillar of cloud and by a Moses increasingly burdened with the role of intermediary. The covenant, symbolized by the tablets of the law, was literally in pieces. But, as in any good drama with divine plot twists, the hope of restoration hung in the dry desert air. The book of Exodus, in chapters 33 and 34, leads us through this process of reconciliation. After Moses' fervent intercession, where he offered to be blotted out of the divine book in exchange for his people's forgiveness, God seems to reconsider his stance of distancing himself. He reiterates the command for the people to go up to the promised land and reaffirms that his angel will go before them. However, the issue of his personal presence is still a delicate one. It's in this context that Moses makes one of the most audacious and intimate requests to God. Please, show me your glory. After all the smoke, fire, thunder, and laws, Moses, the man who spoke with God face to face, as a man speaks to his friend, though this face to face is interpreted in various ways, wanted more. He wanted to see the essence, the full glory of the divinity, an understandable theological curiosity, or perhaps a need for deeper confirmation after so many mishaps and disappointments with the people. God's response is a mix of welcome and warning, revealing both his goodness and his absolute inaccessibility. I will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim before you my name, the Lord. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. A declaration of sovereignty and grace. But as for seeing the divine face, you cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live. God's glory, in its fullness, is simply too much for the mortal constitution, an overdose of holiness. So, God offers an ingenious solution, a kind of controlled glimpse of his majesty. Behold, there is a place by me, says the Lord to Moses, where you shall stand on the rock, and while my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen. Let's pause here for a moment, in the calm of our night, to appreciate the choreography of this encounter. God arranges a place for Moses, a cleft in the rock, like a VIP box for a cosmic spectacle. He will cover him with his protective hand while the bulk of his glory passes, and only then will he allow Moses to see his back, God's back, an image that has intrigued theologians and artists for centuries. What would be the back of an incorporeal being? A metaphor for the effects of his passing, a partial vision, an echo of his presence. The text, with its usual economy in details that pique our curiosity, doesn't specify. It leaves it to us, on the boring testament, to imagine and question. Was it a literal vision or a mystical experience, untranslatable into words? Before this backstage encounter, however, there was work to be done. God commands Moses, "Cut for yourself 2 tablets of stone, like the first, and I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke." Yes, the original tablets, broken in Moses' fury, needed a recall. This time, Moses himself would have to carve the stones, manual labor that perhaps served as a reminder of the fragility of the first attempt and the importance of the law. And so, Moses cuts the 2 new tablets and ascends Mount Sinai again, alone, as the first time, for another 40-day and 40-night retreat, without bread or water. There, God proclaims his name and his attributes before Moses. The Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, and renews the covenant with the people of Israel. The law is rewritten, the second chance is granted. When Moses finally descends from Mount Sinai, after this second long stay in the divine presence, carrying the new tablets of the testimony, something extraordinary happens. And it happened that when Moses came down from Mount Sinai, Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone because he had been talking with him, God, a side effect of prolonged exposure to divine glory. His face shone, radiating a supernatural light. Aaron and all the children of Israel, upon seeing Moses with his radiant face, were afraid to come near him. The same people who feared God's voice now feared the reflection of his glory on their intermediary's face. Holiness, even secondhand, was still a bit too intense. Moses calls them, and Aaron and the leaders of the congregation approach. he conveys the commandments to them, and then, when he finished speaking with them, Moses would put a veil over his face. This veil would become a practice. When Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he would remove the veil. But when he came out and spoke to the people what he had been commanded, the people would see that the skin of his face shone, and Moses would put the veil on his face again until he went in to speak with him. What a powerful image to end our nightly reflection. A leader whose own face becomes a testament to the divine presence, so intense it needs to be veiled for the people to bear. Communication with these sacred leaves marks, transforms, and the subtle irony is that the intermediary, the one who should facilitate access to God, himself becomes an object of fear and reverence, needing a veil to protect the people from his own acquired holiness. The journey in the desert, as we see, is a constant negotiation between proximity and distance, between revelation and mystery, leaving us here on the boring testament with much to ponder about the nature of this strange and fascinating relationship between heaven and earth. We left Moses on the boring testament with a veiled face, a divine radiance that testified to his intimate encounter with the Creator, but which also created a barrier of awe with his own people. Proximity to the sacred, as we've seen, has its side effects, but if God's direct presence was too intense for the Israelites, the divine solution was, apparently, to build a country house for him, right there in the middle of the camp, a way of being present, but with etiquette rules and a good dose of subtle isolation. Thus begins the great project of the tabernacle. After all the commotion of the law, golden calves, and shining faces, God instructs Moses, as we read in the book of Exodus, starting from chapter 25. Speak to the children of Israel, that they bring me an offering. From every man whose heart moves him, you shall receive the offering for me. A fundraising campaign in the desert, and the list of desired materials is impressive for a people who, theoretically, left Egypt in a hurry and lived on manna, gold, silver, bronze, blue, purple, and scarlet yarns, fine linen, goat's hair, ram's skins dyed red, badger skins, or dolphin skins. The translation here is an eternal debate among scholars, which only adds to our nocturnal curiosity. Acacia, wood, oil for the light, spices for the anointing oil, and for the fragrant incense, onyx stones, and stones for setting, for the ephod, and for the breastpiece. A shopping list worthy of a pharaoh, not desert refugees. And we ask ourselves, with our calm irony, where did all this material come from? Could it be the spoils of Egypt they asked from their neighbors before leaving? A retroactive divine compensation for slavery? Or was the Sinai Desert secretly a hub for luxury mining and weaving? The text doesn't delve into these logistical details, focusing more on the willing heart of the givers and the purpose of so much wealth. And let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell in their midst, a dwelling for God, built according to a heavenly model Moses had supposedly seen on the mountain. The instructions are meticulous, detailed to the extreme. The Ark of the Covenant, made of acacia wood, covered with pure gold inside and out, with its poles for transport. After all, it was a mobile residence, and the mercy seat of gold, with two golden cherubim facing each other, with wings outstretched covering the mercy seat. Inside it, the testimony, the tablets of the law, a sacred repository for the divine contract. Then, the table for the bread of the presence, also of acacia and gold, with its plates, spoons, bowls, and cups, the pure gold lampstand, the menorah with its 7 branches, its flowers, buds, and calyxes, all hammered from a single piece of gold. Breathtaking goldsmithing, presumably executed by a people who, until recently, were more concerned with making bricks. The curtains of the tabernacle, of fine twisted linen, blue, purple, and scarlet, with artistically woven cherubim, coverings of goat's hair, rams' skins dyed red, and the mysterious badger dolphin skins, a multi-layered structure to protect the sacred from the profane and perhaps from the harsh desert climate, and the altars, the altar of incense, of acacia, wood covered with gold for aromatic offerings, and the altar of burnt offering, larger, of acacia wood covered with bronze for animal sacrifices, with its grate and all its utensils, and the bronze basin for the priests to wash themselves. To execute a project of such complexity and artistic beauty, skilled craftsmen were needed, and God, apparently, already had his chosen ones, Bezalel of the tribe of Judah and Aholiab of the tribe of Dan. The text says, God filled Bezalel with the Spirit of God, with ability and intelligence, with knowledge and all craftsmanship, to devise artistic designs, to work in gold, silver, and bronze, in cutting stones for setting, and in carving wood. An instant divine empowerment? Or did these talents already exist among the people, just waiting for the opportunity and the raw materials, now abundant, to flourish? A question for our nightly reflection on gifts and opportunities. And the people, the people responded to the call with an enthusiasm that bordered on excess, and they came, everyone whose heart stirred him, and everyone whose spirit moved him, and brought the Lord's offering for the work of the tent of meeting. So they came, both men and women, all who were of a willing heart. They brought so much material, gold, silver, bronze, fabrics, spices, that Moses had to give an order for them to stop. And a proclamation was issued throughout the camp. Let no man or woman do anything more for the offering for the sanctuary. So the people were restrained from bringing, for the material they had was sufficient for all the work to be done, and more. Just imagine, explorers, a fundraising project that not only meets its goal, but surpasses it to the point where it's necessary to ask people to stop donating. A situation that many religious leaders and NGO directors today can only dream of. The irony is that these same people, who so quickly turned to a golden calf, now demonstrated an overflowing generosity to build the dwelling place of the true God, human hearts, always a mystery of contradictions. With the materials and divinely inspired craftsmen, the work of the tabernacle proceeded according to the detailed heavenly design. Every joint, every loop, every piece of furniture, all made with precision. And finally, on the first day of the first month in the second year, after the departure from Egypt, the tabernacle was erected. Moses assembled everything, anointed and consecrated each piece. And the grand finale? Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. The Shekinah, the manifest presence of God, now had an earthly dwelling, right in the center of the camp, a presence so intense that not even Moses, the man with the shining face, could initially enter. For the cloud of the Lord was on the tabernacle by day, and fire was in it by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all their journeys. Spectacular end to a monumental project, God now traveled with his people, visibly and contained, guiding them and reminding them of his holiness. But, as always on the boring testament, questions remain. Was this opulent, rule-filled structure really the desire of a God who claimed to be everywhere, or a concession to the human need for tangible symbols, rituals, and a manageable sacred? The journey was still long, and the tabernacle, with all its glory, would be the stage for many other divine and human dramas. With the tabernacle erected and the glory of the Lord duly installed in a VIP cloud above it, our Israelites on the boring testament might have thought that the most complicated part of the journey, apart, of course, from reaching the promised land, was over. God was among them, visible, in a controlled manner, and all they needed to do was follow the cloud by day and the fire by night. Simple, right? Well, this is where divine bureaucracy enters the scene in full force. In the form of an entire book called Leviticus, if Exodus was action and drama, Leviticus is the standard operating procedures manual, a compendium of rules so detailed it would make any modern tax code look like summer reading. After the consecration of the tabernacle, the Lord calls Moses from the tent of meeting and begins to dictate an impressive series of laws. And the main theme, how to approach a holy God without turning into a cosmic barbecue, and how to maintain ritual purity in the middle of a desert camp, because, apparently, divine holiness is somewhat allergic to human impurity and the vicissitudes of biological life. First, we have the sacrifices, an impressive variety of them, each with its purpose and protocol. There was the burnt offering, the holy burnt offering, where a male animal without defect, an ox, ram, or goat, or even a turtle dove, or young pigeon for the less affluent, was offered. The offerer would lay his hand on the animal's head, symbolically transferring his sins, and then slaughter it. The priest would sprinkle the blood around the altar, and the animal was completely consumed by fire. A pleasing aroma to the Lord, says the text. We wonder, in the calm of this night, if the divine preference for well-done barbecue was a constant, or if there were seasonal variations on the celestial menu. Then came the grain offering, or oblation, made of fine flour, oil, and incense, or unleavened cakes. A vegetarian option on the sacrificial menu, perhaps. Part was burned on the altar, and the rest was for the priests. There were also the peace offerings, where the animal, male or female, without defect, was slaughtered, the blood sprinkled, and certain fatty parts burned. The breast and right thigh belonged to the priests, and the offerer could eat the rest in a communal meal with his family, a kind of sacred fellowship as long as the leftovers were consumed quickly before they became unclean. And of course, sin offerings and guilt offerings could not be missing, for when someone, intentionally or by mistake, yes, even unintentional error, required sacrificial atonement, transgressed one of the countless commandments. The type of animal varied according to the sinner's social status: a young bull for the priest or the entire congregation, a male goat for a leader, a female goat or lamb for a common person, or even 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons for the poorest. Blood, always blood, was the central element, sprinkled, poured, manipulated with a ritualistic precision that would make a modern surgeon feel at home, or perhaps a bit unsettled by the context. The subtle irony for us on the Boring Testament lies in the complexity and the material and emotional cost of this system. In the middle of the desert, where every animal was valuable, maintaining this sacrificial economy must have been a considerable burden. And the idea that the relationship with the divine necessarily passed through this sacred butcher's counter is something that invites us to a deep reflection on the nature of guilt, forgiveness, and worship. But the laws didn't stop at sacrifices. There was a whole universe of rules about ritual purity and impurity, starting with diet, a detailed list of animals that could be eaten, the clean ones, with a divided hoof, and that chew the cud, or with fins and scales, in the case of aquatic ones, and those that were an abomination, the unclean ones, like pigs, camels, hares, shellfish, birds of prey. Touching the carcass of an unclean animal made you unclean until evening, requiring washing of clothes. We imagine the logistical challenge of maintaining a kosher menu in the middle of Sinai, and the heated discussions about whether that strange creature that crawled by was clean or not. Ritual purity also extended to the human body. Childbirth, for example, made a woman unclean for a period, longer if she gave birth to a girl, a detail that certainly wouldn't go unnoticed by our calm revulsion. Skin diseases, generically translated as leprosy, required a thorough inspection by the priest, who acted as a kind of divine dermatologist. Spots, swellings, pustules were examined, and the afflicted could be declared unclean and isolated from the camp for weeks, or even permanently. The purification process, if the person was healed, involved complex rituals with birds, cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet yarn, and we can't forget the various bodily effusions, menstrual flows, seminal emissions, abnormal discharges. All these generated ritual impurity, both for the person and for anything or anyone they touched. Beds, chairs, clothes, everything needed to be washed and purified. The intimate and biological life of the Israelite was constantly monitored and regulated by a purity system that, seen from today, looks like an obsession with controlling the body and a certain aversion to what is naturally human. The priest, of course, was the central figure in this whole system. He was the one who diagnosed purity, performed the sacrifices, instructed the people, and presumably had an encyclopedic knowledge of all these rules, an expert in sacred bureaucracy, the only one with access to the holiest areas of the tabernacle. Leviticus, with its profusion of laws, leaves us here on the boring testament with a sense of vertigo. What was the purpose of so much minutiae? Was it to teach God's holiness through separation and ritual, to create a distinct cultural identity for Israel, to promote hygiene and public health in disguise? Or was it a reflection of the complexity of life itself, which the ancients tried to order through a comprehensive symbolic system? Perhaps a bit of all of that, but imagining the common Israelite trying to navigate this labyrinth of ritual obligations in daily desert life, we can't help but feel a pang of sympathy, and of course, that characteristic urge of ours to ask, was all this really necessary? Our nocturnal immersion in the boring testament through the meticulous laws of Leviticus now leads us to one of the most sacred and ritualistically dense days in the Israelite calendar, the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur. If daily sacrifices and purity laws were the constant maintenance of the camp's holiness, the Day of Atonement was the great annual cleanup, the attempt to reset the score of collective and individual sins that inevitably accumulated despite all efforts, a true spiritual reset with a rather specific celestial protocol. Once a year, only the high priest, Aaron, and later his descendants, could enter the Holy of Holies, the innermost and most sacred part of the tabernacle, where the Ark of the Covenant resided, and consequently, the most concentrated presence of God. And he didn't just walk in. There was meticulous preparation, ritual baths, special garments of pure linen, not his opulent daily priestly vestments, but something simpler, perhaps to denote humility before the task, and a series of sacrifices to first atone for his own sins and those of his household, and then the sins of all the people. After all, to intercede for others, one needed to be reasonably clean on the divine record. The central ritual involved 2 goats. Lots were cast over them, one lot for the Lord and the other for Azazel, a mysterious term which some interpret as a desert place, others as a demon or an evil force. The goat on which the lot for the Lord fell was sacrificed as a sin offering. Its blood was taken inside the veil, into the Holy of Holies, and sprinkled on the mercy seat of the ark, a purification at the heart of holiness. But the fate of the other goat, the goat for Azazel, is what truly captures our imagination with a touch of drama and primitive symbolism. The high priest would lay both his hands on the head of the live goat and confess over it all the iniquities of the children of Israel and all their transgressions, all their sins. And, having symbolically placed all these sins on the animal's head, the goat was then sent away into the wilderness by a designated man to bear on itself all their iniquities to a remote area, the famous scapegoat. Let's pause for a moment in the stillness of this night to visualize this scene. An animal burdened with the invisible weight of an entire nation's sins, being led into the arid, inhospitable vastness, to disappear and, with it, carry the people's transgressions far away. An ingenious ritualistic solution to the problem of collective guilt. And we ask ourselves, with our usual ironic curiosity, what happened to the goat? Did it simply wander, until it died of thirst and hunger? And Azazel, whoever or whatever it was it satisfied with this annual offering of walking sins? The text doesn't give us these details, but the image of a solitary animal carrying everyone's burden is powerful and somewhat melancholic. Besides, the Day of Atonement, Leviticus is filled with other laws governing daily life, morality, and social justice. You shall not steal. You shall not deal falsely. You shall not lie to one another. You shall not oppress your neighbor or rob him. The wages of a hired worker shall not remain with you all night until the morning. You shall not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block before the blind. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Admirable ethical precepts which form the basis of many moral systems to this day. However, mixed with these laws of universal appeal, we find others that, to our modern sensibilities, sound challenging. Severe punishments for a variety of offenses, including the death penalty for transgressions like blasphemy, adultery, or disrespecting parents in certain contexts, and the famous laws of eye for eye, tooth for tooth, the lex talionis, which, although they sought proportionality in justice, today seem somewhat too literal in their application, and to ensure compliance with all this divine legislation, what better than a good old system of incentives and disincentives? Leviticus chapter 26 presents us with a detailed catalog of the blessings that would come from obedience and the curses that would follow disobedience, a kind of divine contract with bonus clauses and hefty fines. If they walked in God's statutes, there would be rains in their season. The land would yield its produce, and the trees their fruit. They would eat their bread to the full, and dwell securely in their land. Peace in the land, no wild beasts, and the sword shall not pass through your land. They would chase their enemies, and they would fall. God would walk among them and be their God, and they would be his people. An idyllic scenario of prosperity and divine security. But if they did not listen and did not observe the commandments, oh, then things got ugly, and the list of curses is extensive and graphic, almost a horror movie script for sleepless nights. Terror, consumption, and burning fever that consume the eyes and make the soul pine, sowing seed in vain, for enemies would eat it. Defeat before enemies, the heavens becoming like iron, and the earth like bronze. Wild beasts of the field that would rob them of their children and destroy their livestock. Plagues, sword, famine, besieged cities, to the point of, well, the text describes acts of desperation that we prefer not to detail in the calm of this night, but which involve what happens when hunger reaches its most extreme limit, and finally, scattering among the nations and the desolation of the land. A pedagogy of fear, undoubtedly, aimed at keeping the people in line, and we, here on the Boring Testament, are left to reflect on this theology of retribution, on the idea of a God who operates so directly in the cause and effect of human actions, rewarding obedience with abundance and punishing disobedience with detailed and relentless fury. Was this the only way to guide a stiff-necked people, or was it a reflection of the anxieties and worldview of an ancient culture trying to find order and meaning in an often chaotic and hostile universe? Questions that remain echoing from the Sinai desert to our headphones in the stillness of this night.